I have to tell you about an incident which occurred last week. I realized that my insurance would pay for a new pair of glasses, but I had to get the appointment in by the end of the year. So I called in and I got the second to last available appointment and went in for my exam. And we were fitting the glasses and trying to find something with larger lenses. You know, these glasses that are in style now with the small lenses, I don't like those. So we finally found a pair that I liked, and the woman that was helping me put them on my face, and then she asked me to look at her nose while she marked where my bifocal line would go. And so I remarked, well, it's a pretty nose. I don't mind looking at it. I guess that made a good impression. And so later she asked me, so what are your plans for the new year? Well, I paused and I said, well, do you really want to know? And she nodded. So I said, well, I'm a minister and I do biblical research. I specialize in original Christianity and recovering what was believed in the first century and bringing it into the 21st century. And right now, we are studying Joshua's long day in Joshua 10. And with what we know scientifically in the 21st century, there is the possibility that the sun and moon mentioned in the passage were actually an eclipse. Now, 16 months from now, there's going to be a total solar eclipse that's going to go right over my house, overhead here in Indianapolis. And this is going to be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to test something. So I told this woman, these are my plans. I want to contact the physics department at Indiana University, Bloomington, Indiana, and also the physics department at IUP-UI in Indianapolis, another university with Purdue and IU, and see if they are interested in testing for the Alias effect on Foucault pendulums. This will be a way to test to see if the lineup with the sun and the moon that are on the same side of the earth when they are in an eclipse, whether that lineup affects Earth's gravity to the degree that a measurable difference will be observed in the movements of a Foucault pendulum. She's staring at me by this time. You've seen one of those in a museum, haven't you? I asked. You know, they hang from the ceiling in a tall vaulted room, and the rotation of the earth causes them to swing on their own, and they swing in a pattern. And she nodded. She'd seen that. And I said, well, a laser could be set up to measure any differences in the movement of the pendulum that occur during an eclipse. If there is evidence of a difference in the movement, that could be what triggered the Earth to jiggle on its axis a bit while it was spinning, and that might be, in my opinion, what caused Joshua's long day. So, you asked me, what am I planning? That's what I'm planning for the new year. You asked me, so I told you. I bet she didn't expect something like that. So, if you were her, what would you think? Would you think I was nuts? Then I said, it appears to me that you're interested, and she nodded. So I gave her my next Reformation Church card. We'll see if she contacts me. That experiment of the Alias effect is step Z in a process. Now I'm going to explain, beginning with step A, how we might get there. Ren has given us some chronological context, and Renee some scientific context, and so now I'm up to the plate. So let me talk a little bit first about what I've done with my inspection. Most of the time, the Bible is straightforward. It interprets itself right where it's written in the verse. It means what it says what it means. We just have to read it. Occasionally, we have to use some of the other rules of hermeneutics on how the Bible interprets itself, but this passage has information that could go a few different ways in Joshua 10. So we have to resort to a deeper analysis. There are three phenomenal things involved. A, rocks or hailstones falling upon the enemy. And there's two variables there. They could be meteors or hailstones. B, something happened with the sun that elongated a day. The meaning of the Hebrew word damam, Strong's number 1626, could either be become silent or wait, could be become dark. Something happened with the moon as well. And the word damam, Strong 1626, is used of it too. But verse 13 also uses Strong's word 5975, amad, which means stand. So there's three phenomenal things that happened. You had a meteor shower, you had something with the moon, and something with the sun. All right? For Joshua's long day. Now, first, I need to mention a NASA rumor that is traveling around, that they were one day winding their computers back and they found an anomaly and they didn't know what it was, and someone said, oh, that was Joshua's long day. And then they found another anomaly in their schedule, and the same person said, oh, that's Hezekiah's sundial. You may have even heard that. It's very interesting, but it is a folk tale. It did not happen, because you need a point of reference. You just can't have one point of reference. You have to have two, and they don't have two. So it's a hoax, unfortunately. So I'm going to include an article about that. You may have heard this thing about NASA. There's another one like that, which says that our DNA is written in Aramaic. That's the same thing. It's a holy hoax. But anyway, I wanted to mention that to you. I'm going to include a PDF on that. So anyway, my train of thought goes like this. Were A, B, and C, the meteors, something with the sun and something with the moon, three separate miracles, or were they somehow related as one? Well, it's more likely that they were related. I mean, if there were an eclipse, the sun and the moon would definitely be involved, but how would that involve a meteor shower or the lengthening of a day? So right now I'm wondering, was it an eclipse? But that's still a very tantalizing possibility, because the battle was facilitated by a long day. It didn't appear long. It was long, because extra time was involved to defeat the enemy entirely. Now, there are several scenarios for what happened that could result in a long day, and I'm going to include an article on that too that goes over some of these. First one could be a miracle with the sun, where the earth normally circles the sun, but what if the sun moved instead? Well, it's a miracle. God can do anything he wants, but is that practical? I just thought, well, all right, the circumference of a circle is C equals 2 pi r. That's the formula. R is the radius. So if God miraculously caused the sun to move so that as the earth turned, the sun would appear to not move in the sky, how fast would the sun have to be moving around the earth? All right, just to prove this, see if it was practical. The earth is 93 million miles from the sun, so 2 pi r is 2 times 3.1416 times 93 million miles, which is 584,337,600 miles. And that would move that far in 24 hours all the way around to match the rotation of the earth. So, divided by 24 hours, that would be 24,347,400 miles an hour. Now, is that possible? Well, the speed of light is 186,285 miles per second. So that would be 670,626,000 miles per hour. So the sun would be moving at about 1/28 the speed of light if the sun not moving in the sky was due to the sun suddenly starting to go around the earth instead of the earth going around the sun. So, did that happen? Well, it also says the moon stopped. So that's a second miracle. So I don't think that the sun moved around the earth to make it appear that the sun didn't move from someone on the earth's perspective. Because the moon stopped too, so that would take a second miracle, but then we'd have to take into account the entire solar system. What about all the planets and the asteroids and the Oort cloud? Because if the sun moved like that, it would cause chaos. There'd have to be trillions of miracles to accommodate that. So it's more likely that the Earth's rotation was affected so that it looked like the sun didn't move. That would only require one miracle. But let me say another thing about miracles. God's in charge. He can make miracles available anytime he wants. He's God. I'm not going to say, God, you can't do that. But how does he do that? Does he break his own rules? Well, he's also a God of order, not disorder. And he created the universe, and it works by natural law. The laws of gravity, momentum, conservation of energy, and laws of thermodynamics, etc. So, in my view, the miracles that he does are in harmony with those other laws that he made. In my opinion, any interventions from the spiritual realm will work with the laws extant in the natural realm and, when necessary, supersede them, but do so in an orderly manner, not chaos. For example, the Exodus crossing of the sea at the Straits of Tiran used an existing seamount. The walls of Jericho fell because of a precisely timed earthquake. The miracle involved the timing coincident with the priests and the army's actions, and its precise location and its strength that caused the walls to fall. Or, that which destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah was a meteor airburst under which they found shocked quartz and evidence of high temperatures on the ground. Or Moses striking the rock was hitting a stopped-up spring attached to an underground aquifer, which, when opened, gushed out. The miracle was the revelation regarding where to hit. But again, God can do miracles like the manna. That was totally supernatural, being on the schedule like it was. Or raising Jesus Christ from among the dead. That was a miracle of miracles. Or some miracles we have witnessed, in which people's arms and legs or missing bones have instantaneously grown. So, all this mental gymnastics trying to figure this out. Well, God gave us a brain. There's nothing wrong with us trying to use it. We still may not have enough detailed information to tell how God did stuff, but regardless, we still ought to have faith that it happened. If the Bible says it happened, then it happened. We have to make sure we understand what the Bible says and not let our conjecture go too far afield. That's when we have to make sure that we understand the words in the Bible. It was written by ancient people to ancient people. It's not written using modern scientific terms. It was written in ancient terms of what they saw and heard. And then next, it was transmitted down through the ages until now. Now, thankfully, the Masoretes did a much better job protecting and preserving the Hebrew Old Testament text than the Greek New Testament. But there still were times when the Old Testament was edited, like when Ezra's peers converted from the Samaritan character set to the Babylonian square character set that we are familiar with today with Hebrew, or when they added the vowel points, or if there were any textual variations. You can study up on the transmission of the Hebrew text with C.D. Ginsburg's book titled Introduction of the Masoretico-Critical Edition of the Hebrew Bible. That's a very good resource for this. And then the area of the most possibility for change occurred when the Old Testament was translated. The translators may have chosen the wrong word meanings, and we have to take that into account. So that we have to make sure we understand what is written. Now, scenario number 2, possible miracle. The rotation of the earth miraculously stopped and then restarted. That's what some people might think. That would be purely miraculous. No natural phenomena could cause that. But if the Earth stopped rotating because of inertia, the seas would leave their spots and wash over the Earth like tsunamis. So there'd have to be a miracle to stop that. I just don't think that was what happened. Number 3 theory is that there was a refraction of light that appeared to make the sun move. But what could cause that? A big mirror in the sky? I kind of doubt that. But there is a 4th possibility. When we were kids, we all probably played with spinning tops. Remember that? And remember what that was like? We'd watch those tops spin because they spun differently. We saw the gyroscopic effect, and that was that it maintained its axis, even if it was off-center or not straight upright. They could stay at an angle because of the gyroscopic effect, and they would maintain it. Now, the Earth is like a giant spinning top. But what do tops do in addition to spinning? Well, they wobble. Do you remember? The axis of the top would describe a circle. And there are 2 kinds of wobbles. The first kind was that the axis of the spinning top often will slowly circle in a backwards direction of the top's spin. That is called precession. And the Earth does that. One wobble in the Earth's precession takes 26,000 years. That is why Polaris has not always been the polar star, where the axis of the Earth points now. Thousands of years ago, before the adversary fell, the polar star was Thuban, which is the brightest star in the constellation Draco, the dragon. Wow. There's another kind of wobble in the tops that we witnessed that occasionally we would see, and that is when the axis would make a quick loop and then resume where it was. It'd like jerk or jiggle. Now, that was caused by harmonic vibrations that build up and build up and build up until they could change the axis just for a moment, and the spin of the top changed a little bit. It's like the wave on a lake that crests every once in a while when all the vibrations of all the other parts of the wave sink, and then it goes back to its regular movement. Now, the Earth is not perfectly balanced. Plus, there's all kinds of vibrations bouncing back and forth within the Earth. You know, the magnetic pole is not aligned with the North Pole, where the axis of the Earth is. Why is that? Because there's a mass of magnetic iron in the center of the Earth that's off-center. So, anyway, if this little jerk happened, or loop happened, in the movement of the axis of the Earth as it spun, there would be portions of the Earth that would experience a longer day, and there would be portions of the Earth that experienced a longer night. Believe it or not, in 2004, when that giant earthquake caused the tsunami in Indonesia, the spin of the Earth was affected. Something might have triggered a jerk in the axis like that back then in Joshua 10. So, let me parse these possibilities for you and show you how I do analytical thinking. The way I approached this was from several different standpoints. The first thing I inspected was, I wondered what the great stones that fell from heaven were. And I thought, well, if they are a meteor shower, then there are meteor showers today that occur in the spring that might be related to what happened back in Joshua 10. Because, meteor showers happen every so many years in a cycle, right? The strongest meteor showers are the year after the comet that produces them passes. The following year is always the most concentrated. So, if there were a lot of stones that fell from heaven, It probably would be in the year after a comet passed. So I started looking for meteor showers that occur in the spring. So, for example, I did a test of the Lyrid meteor shower. Now, I know that's in the fall, but I wanted to do a proof of concept. So, the Lyrid meteor shower is caused by the Tempel-Tuttle comet that has a period of every 33 years. And the year after it passes the Earth, there is a big meteor shower that following year. So in 1899, in 1866, in 1833, the Lyrid meteor shower was huge. In fact, in 1833, it was so huge, 75,000 meteors per hour. It was like a big firework in the sky. A lot of churches started right after that. I wonder why. Is part of the Great Awakening. But anyway, what I did is I made a spreadsheet. And I wound back the spreadsheet back into our target area, which is the 1400s and 1500s BC for this possible event in Joshua. So, when you cross over the boundary between 1 AD and 1 BC, I figured out how that would work. So I got my proof of concept working, and I wound it all the way back so that in that 2-century era, that was our target. There was a Lyrid meteor shower a year after the comet passed in 1402 BC, 1435 BC, 1468 BC, and 1501 BC. So I just did a proof of concept. But Lyrid's in the fall. That's not our candidate for the possible meteors. So then I picked another meteor shower that happens in the spring, the Lyrid, Lyrid, that happens in late April. The peak date for most meteors, is April the 22nd every year. So it's produced by the comet named C/161 G1 Thatcher. And that was discovered April 5th in 1861 by A.E. Thatcher. And it comes out of the sky in the portion of where Vega and the Harp constellation is. Lyra, the Harp, that's why it's called Lyrid. And so the next pass of that comet past Earth is going to be in the year 2283. It has a period of 415 years. Every 415 years, it passes the Earth's orbit. So, if you take that back to our target era, one of the passes of the comet that causes the Lyrid meteor shower was in 1451 BC. So, then I looked for other ones. There's an Eta Lyrid that peaks May the 10th from Comet C/1, 1983, the Araki Alcock. They name it after the guys that discovered it. And sometimes if there's two that discover it and report it the same night, they hyphenate the name. So anyway, they discovered it. But that one has a very long period of 970 years, and there were no passes by the Earth in our target era of those 2 centuries from 1400 to 1500 BC. So, but then I started thinking, well, if it was a meteor shower, those meteors are the size of a pea or smaller. They hit the atmosphere so fast they burn up. That's what makes the streaks. But they're all very small. But the stones that fell from heaven, it says they were big stones. And they killed more people than the soldiers did. So I think, well, no, wait, that doesn't fit with a meteor shower from comets. It'd have to be meteors from asteroids. Well, if they were from asteroids, then it was most likely a one-time deal. So, not going to benefit from trying to figure that one out. So then why was it springtime? Well, this is the time that they do battle in ancient times, because in Palestine and Israel, the climate is such that they plant the equivalent of winter wheat. They plant in October and November. It grows all winter, and barley too, because the winters are mild, so it's like winter wheat. And then the harvest time is after Nisan. Now remember, they had that wave offering of the first barley harvest during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So then after the barley harvest, there was a 2 or 3 week span. And then after that was the wheat harvest. So the best time to mobilize an army was during that interim period in between the barley harvest and the wheat harvest. Because the thinking was they didn't have standing armies back then in those small city-states that were around Canaan at that time. They just got all the regular farmers together to fight for their country and their family and their land. But those farmers were not professional trained soldiers. There was not a standing army. So they could be routed easily. They could be spooked. That's why Balaam was asked to curse Israel by Balak, because that would embolden his citizens. So anyway, why springtime? In Joshua 3:16, the Jordan overflowed all its banks all the time of harvest. So it's springtime. In Joshua 4:19, the people of Israel came out of Jordan on the 10th day of the first month, springtime, and camped in Gilgal. Then the men were circumcised. After that, in chapter 5, verse 10, they kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month, springtime. So, now I'm not sure if we know exactly what the date was, because there is a book by Parker and Duberstein, but their list of all the calendar, the Jewish calendar, does not go back that far into the 1400, 1500 BC. They're the ones who plotted out the Jewish calendar. But when you get back that far, there were so many possibilities, you can't really specify it with too much accuracy. Now, here's something that is a misconception sometimes that people don't realize, is back then that far in history, they did not follow a set pattern for the intercalary months, the extra months, like second Adar, which I'll explain. A lunar year matches the new moons, has months alternating 29 and 30 days, all right? 12 of those lunar months, then, is 11 days short of a calendar year. So what they have to do is throw in a second Adar month, a leap month, like every 2 or 3 years to keep the springtime in the spring, all right? But they did not use a set schedule to do that at first. That did not start till Hillel II declared it in the 4th century A.D. It was almost like Groundhog Day. If Mr. Potsatuxi Phil sees his shadow or not. Because if the high priest, agricultural expert, thought that the barley would be ripe in time for the special offering during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, then, the next month would be Nisan. But if the barley wasn't going to be ready, ta-da, the priest would declare a second Adar. And he would do that even if the last one was only 2 years ago instead of 3, if it was needed. See? And this is how it was before Hillel codified it and made it happen on a set schedule. Every 19 years, there'd be 7 extra second Adar months. All right? So the further back in time we go, it becomes more and more difficult to figure out exactly when Nisan the first fell. All right? At least we know it was in March. So the Passover would be in March through May, depending upon the weather and all of that. So the Feast of Unleavened Bread would have run the 15th to the 21st of the second month, then, or of the Feast of the 21st of the first month. Then they had to circle Jericho for 7 days and attack. And then afterward, that would be quick over with because there was no looting. And then at least the 22nd through the 28th of the first month. So I'm just saying, if these things followed one after another, boom, 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 with no delay in between, I'm trying to find the minimum time for how they would go, just for a rough estimate. So then the second month starts after the 29th, or 29 days instead of 30. And so then the first day of the second month, or the second day of the second month, you had that first battle of Ai. Then the next day, Achan was exposed, the one that had taken of the accursed thing. And then the next day after that, if everything flowed boom, 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 would have been the second battle of Ai. And so the minimum time for the second battle of Ai would be the third day of the second month. Then they built an altar at Mount Ebal, and then they enacted that ritual that Moses had told them to do, where half of them get on one mountain and half of them get on the other mountain, like Moses said, and they shouted back and forth. That probably would have been an all-day affair. And then you have a period of time. It doesn't say how long that was, but that's when the pagan kings formed their alliance. So you'd have to have a few days in there. And so you get to Joshua chapter 9, and they gathered the army. And then after that, that's when the Gibeonites deceived Israel and surrendered to them. So figuring out the minimum time if everything happened, which it probably did not. I wanted a minimum time span. That would have been the Sabbath day of the second month. 3 days later, it says, see, there's a lot of details here. 3 days later, in Joshua 9:16, and it says they found out that the Gibeonites had lied to them. So that would have been the 10th day minimum of the second month. And then when the other kings found out that Gibeon had surrendered, they had to get their alliance together, deploy their army. If they did it in one day, they probably didn't. That would have been the 11th day of the second month. And then Joshua marches all night from Gilgal. So the minimum time for the beginning of the battle of Joshua 10 would have been the second month, the 12th day. But if there was an eclipse, that would have to be the last day of the lunar month, because that's when the sun and the moon are on the same side of the earth at a new moon stage, all right? So if I have the 12th day is the minimum of the second month, and then the maximum, if it were an eclipse, would be the last day of the second month, then we've got a time span in there that we can fill in with all the extra events that may have taken longer than just being one after another after another. So in other words, I'm saying there's wiggle room there, and it's reasonable that the eclipse could have been what happened, and it would have been at the end of the second month, right? So that proof of concept. So then, the third thing I looked at is the position of the sun and the moon that was talked about in Joshua chapter 10. Because it said the sun is over Gibeon, and that's on the east, and then the moon is over the valley of Ajalon, and that's west of it. So that means the viewer who said that is looking south. Well, that's accurate, because from the northern hemisphere, the sun follows a path that is south of the meridian. It's not directly overhead, unless you're down in South America, all right? And so with that map that Renee gave us, it shows us a path that they took. So let me, I think, am I still sharing my screen here? I think I am, yes. So let me bring in the map. Okay, this is from the PDF that I issued named Chapter 3, Session 15c, Illustrations. And the first image at the top. So this is Renee's map from his blog. So here is Gibeon, right here, on the right. And over here is the Valley of Ajalon on his map on the left. So they're looking south, and they see the sun and the moon. The sun is over here on the right. The moon is over there. On the left, that is, if the Valley of Ajalon is here. But there is a map from Oxford Bible Atlas that shows the Valley of Ajalon curving here. On the second map, close up, it curves between Ajalon and Beth Horon. Then it turns to the south. Do you see that? Now, do you see this line right here? Next to the green line. Right there, that line. Right next to it. On the left. Going diagonally to the southeast. That's a valley. That could have been the Valley of Ajalon. So, if I'm up here at Beth Horon, and I'm looking southeast towards Gibeon, the green line represents where I'm looking. The Valley of Ajalon could be right here on the left of the line. And so the moon and the sun are in the same direction. You see that? They would be together. Now, these are all assumptions, but I'm just seeing if it's practical. So then, if Joshua is up here in the rear guard of the army, as the army is chasing all the people down through this path, because it says they followed a road. So if he is up here, he would be north, looking southeast. And if he were looking in the direction the sun's here, on his left, but our right on the map, and the moon's there, on his right, from his perspective, well, that's close enough that they could be an eclipse. Isn't that interesting? All right. Today in modern Israel, there's a path that goes up through here because the topography has not changed. And so that follows Israeli Route 436. And then this part that goes over to Beth Horon, that follows Israeli Route 45. So when Joshua spoke to the sun and the moon, he would have been in a rear guard, probably up at Beth Horon. So that also fits with an eclipse. All right? So you see the possibilities there. Now, honestly, there are so many variables and some assumptions too. We cannot say with certainty what happened. But all I am saying, an eclipse is possible. All right? So here is what I did. What eclipse? Now, Renee had said 1405. What I have here, Chapter 3, Session 15c, Illustrations, PDF, if you can see that, is a whole list of eclipses that occurred between 1604 BC and 1405 BC, either total eclipses or annular eclipses or partial eclipses. Now, total eclipse is when the sun is completely covered. An annular eclipse is where the distances are not quite right for the moon to totally cover the sun, and there's a ring of fire around it. And a partial is a partial. And so look at all of those eclipses. Now, what I did is I went to the site right here on NASA's site. Okay? So I'm going to go down and show this to you. So here is the whole area of all the eclipses for 3,000 years. And here is 1599 to 1500. So right here. Now we open that one up. So here's the catalog of all of the solar eclipses that cross the Earth at any time. All right? Now, Ren Minetti said that his potential date was 1584 BC. Renee said 1405. So, right here, there was a partial eclipse in March 28th in Judea that occurred in 1585. Ooh, just 1 year off of our target date for Ren Minetti. So let me go down here. So here's 1585, March the 28th. there it shows. Now you see that this is fascinating. Here it shows on the NASA website a picture of the Earth where the path of the eclipse went. So this particular eclipse was a partial eclipse. The red line is where the most coverage went, right there. But then this area is part of the umbra, where the shadow of the moon on the Earth caused what would be a partial eclipse. And here's Spain, Mediterranean Sea, boop, right there is where Joshua was in 1585. So they saw a partial eclipse in 1585 right there that happened March the 28th in the spring. Isn't that fascinating? All right. So now let's look at Renee's eclipse. All right. I'm going to close this. And now we'll go back to 1405. So 1405, we go to this sheet, and 1405, July the 14th, boom. Here is Renee's candidate. This is a total eclipse. Here is the path of the sun. You see that? And it goes right smack dab through the Mediterranean, right over Judea, right there. Isn't that interesting? That is fascinating, isn't it? So now let me get back to what I was explaining. So there's possibilities. There's a list of about 20 solar eclipses that happened during our target centuries, 1400, 1500, and it'll depend upon Wren's chronology, how we fit everything all together. And, we're doing the best we can, but right now, we're 1 year off of an eclipse. That's fascinating. And we might be able to find, this year is there. So we might be able to change it. I don't know. But anyway, now, if it was an eclipse, what connection would there be with meteors or hailstones? All right. Well, I said, if there were meteors, they'd have to be from asteroids. They have to be big enough. And there would be craters left along that pathway. Because you see in the map, the meteors attacked the soldiers as they were going south from Ajalon to Azekah along that road there. And so if they were meteors, there'd be craters there, but there aren't. But in the same verse, they're called hailstones. It's a different word. So were they stones or ice? Because one of Strong's number 68, which is stones, and the other is Strong's 1259, that's ice. Those are hailstones. So I thought, okay, what if they're hailstones? I went to the weather websites, and I said, well, tell me about all the real bad hailstorms that you've recorded, ones that have killed people. And there have been some where less than 100 people were killed in Bangladesh. In India, there's another one in India where 300 were killed, and those hailstones were the size of tennis balls or larger. Anything smaller than that would have been not lethal, but it's a rarity. Physically, to have a hailstorm with that much ice to kill people would require a lot of wind, a lot of bad weather, tornadoes, supercells. All right. Now, if it was hail that was made out of ice, there'd probably have to be clouds. That wouldn't have happened in a sky that is clear. So what that does is that brings in the possibility that not only could this have been a total eclipse like Renee's candidate, but also a partial. Here is a picture of a partial eclipse through clouds that was taken from Iran. All right. I was at the total eclipse back in 2017 that I traveled into Illinois, and it was cloudy, so we traveled down into Kentucky and ended up in Madisonville, Kentucky, in a park where we were there when the eclipse occurred. There was someone right next to us that had a camera with a filter on it that you could look at it and see the moon occulting the sun, covering it. You could not look straight up and see that like this picture. You could not see that with there being no clouds. It was too bright. It would hurt your eyes. It'd injure your eyes, actually. So the only way you could see a partial eclipse was if there were clouds. And so if the ice that fell was ice that was lofted aloft by a real violent storm, like what happens during hailstorms, then you allow in all those other partial eclipses that I have in that list. All right? Now, I'm not saying that this is exactly what happened, but the different coincidences are accumulating. All right? So now, how did that affect the Earth's rotation? Well, if there were a wobble in the Earth's axis, like I explained, then from the standpoint of someone on the Earth, there are places on the Earth that there would be a longer day. Then there would be places also that would have a longer night. And I'm going to show you a map from an article. Let's bring this up right here. You see, this is a picture of the Earth, and here is where it's daytime, here is where it's nighttime, and every one of these dots is a place where there is a story from oral tradition that there was a long day or there was a long night. Every one of these places, a long night. American Indians, south in Mexico, the Aztecs, South America, and even in Fiji, right here, there is an account of a long sunrise. So if the long day occurred over here, the long night would be here, the long sunset would be there. Isn't that fascinating? I'm going to include this article. So, now in the article, their target date was 1448. All right? So, I mean, there was a long day that was recorded in Egypt in the hieroglyphics. There was a long sunrise, not sunset, sunrise in Fiji. Long nights in Mexico and North America. In fact, in the hieroglyphic record in Egypt, it talks about tsunamis that were so bad, it killed half the cattle that were in the delta area of Egypt. So if there was a wobble on the Earth's axis, then there would be parts of the world where there could be tsunamis. All right? That is really interesting. So now I finally get to what I talked about with Foucault pendulums. So it's called the Alias effect. He did an experiment with a Foucault pendulum during an eclipse, and he said that the movement of the Foucault pendulum changed during the eclipse. Now, what a Foucault pendulum is, it's where you hang a weight with a really long cable. Usually they do it in a vaulted room, 30 feet, 40 feet, some of them are 100 feet long. And then you hang it, and you put it in the middle of the room, you just let it hang motionless, but it will start to move on its own because of the rotation of the Earth. It'll start to move on its own, and then it'll build up a certain amplitude, so it'll move the same distance after that point, and it'll describe a loop all the way around a circle like a star. loop here, loop there, loop here, loop here, all the way around in a circle, like a spirograph graph, all right? If you know those toys that make those squiggly lines, it'll go all the way around. So anyway, Alias claimed that during an eclipse, this movement was altered. Now, there's some controversy, as with anything with science, and some people said, no, that can't be. It was the barometric pressure that changed when the temperature changed when the eclipse hit. So, in 2024, in April, when the eclipse passes straight overhead at IU campus in Bloomington, Indiana, I'd like to have worked with the physics department down there and suggested that they get their students together and do an experiment. And same with IUPUI in Indianapolis. Now, if there was an effect, that proves that the movement of the Earth, the spin of the Earth, was affected when the sun and the moon lined up. That could have been enough. And I underline could. I'm not saying it did. It could have been enough to trigger that little wobble that happens with the top every once in a while. Okay? And that would produce the long day or the long night. Renee said that he's heard of evidence that there's increased seismic activity, volcanic activity during eclipses. I need to find that. So that's great. I'm going to be talking to some college professors, see if I can get them to get their students to test that. So there's a lot of clues, but nothing definitive. All right? So that's what we're going to share tonight. Now, if your head is spinning by now, that's okay. So is the Earth. So, but one day, maybe we'll figure it all out. So, bless you.